I'm Jatin. I'm the co-founder of eChai Network. We host engaging startup networking meetups in 25 global cities in 15 countries. We have a membership program. You can check out our website to discover more about what we do and what benefits are there for being part of the community. Since lockdown, we've started a lot of online series in addition to our offline meetups, which we used to host earlier. So this one is the latest one, and I'm really excited. I'm a big believer of books. I recommend to my friends to read about books. So there's this series we are starting, Books for Entrepreneurs, where we invite the authors of awesome business books to come and share about their experiences, why they wrote these books, what are the takeaways for founders, and their own journey of writing a book and publishing and distributing the book. Today's our first episode. Sudhir Sitapati, who is the author of The CEO Factory. I have the book with me. And those of you are watching this video and happen to be in Ahmedabad, there is a library we are setting up with awesome books. So you'll get to read wherever you are watching or reading this conversation. You can give a comment and we'll figure out on how you can get access to it. Or of course, we'll share the links also. With this, we'll just get started with our discussion. Sudhir, thank you so much for accepting the invite.
No, my pleasure, Jatin. My pleasure. And it's very nice to speak to somebody who's sitting in IIM Ahmedabad.
Sudhir, I wanted to ask you questions about books, but yesterday you wrote a post about Indians becoming global CEOs, the people with Indian experience. You mentioned about Sandeep Kataria from Bata and Milind Pant from Amway also. So what was that? If you can share that context, that would be great.
No, I think, both my bosses, early bosses in HUL, so they're CEOs from HUL, and Sandeep became the CEO, global CEO of Bata recently. And it's a unique trend because earlier on, HUL was producing a lot of CEOs for the Indian market. But now, we've started, these two relatively young people are now CEOs of global corporations, which requires a different set of skills. You see, HUL is a CEO factory for India for a set of skills and a set of reasons. And I've been quite curiously looking at the number of Indians who have become global CEOs. First it was people who did their first degree in India, Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella or, even Indra Nooyi, etc., Jaipanka. They've all done their first, they might even have worked for a year or two, but predominantly they worked in the US and they studied there. But both Sandeep and Milind have spent, bulk of their career in India. So there's a second wave of CEOs who come from the Indian operating environment. So that is quite interesting. They don't come from a Western operating environment. So I found that, something I've been thinking about for some time. So I thought I'll share it in a LinkedIn post.
Another reason you mentioned about is staying at the wicket.
That's right. I feel that a lot of people in India, certainly of my generation and older than mine, and are test cricket aficionados. We'll talk about the younger generation in a minute's time. But, one of the values of test cricket is to stay on the pitch. You have a fast ball, you have a bouncer being bowled, you bat through those overs, you go to the next over. And I think that's a quality that Indians, certainly of a certain generation, have in the corporate world. There are many reasons why Indians succeed in the global corporate world. This is certainly not the only one. It may not even be the main one. But certainly I feel that Indians whom I know have a tendency to stay on the wicket for longer. You get a knock here, you get a knock there. You sort of come back and you continue the batting, and then ultimately you hit the century. I think it's not a uniquely Indian trait, but there's certainly a lot of Indians exhibit this trait of staying at the wicket. I mean, it's an interesting question to say whether the T20 generation will have the same values as the test generation, because the T20 generation, staying at the wicket is not such an important thing. But time will tell some of these things. You never know now.
Absolutely. And what is CEO Factory?
CEO Factory is a book on HUL, and we started off with India being a CEO factory, but within India, for the globe, but within India, HUL is very clearly the CEO factory for many, many decades. And Sandeep and, even now, if you look at the top 20 companies in India, 10 of them will have HUL CEOs, all 20 will have the top 3-4 people, somebody from HUL, right? So there's something unique about a company which for many, many years, many decades in India has performed very, very successfully. Steady performer. It's not in the hare and tortoise race. HUL has been the tortoise. It continues to motor on and has, as a consequence, produced these leaders who lead very, very disparate companies. In India today, you can go to Airtel or Google or DMart. I mean, you name your pick in the consumer sector, you'll find an HUL guy there. And really, this book is about what is so unique about HUL that it produces so many CEOs.
You are with HUL with almost 22 years, and you joined in 1999. So what was that key trigger that you thought, okay, now I should write a book about this topic?
The trigger for this was, a few years ago, our chairman, who was about to retire, Harish Manwani, he was the COO of Unilever. He's now the chairman of the ISB board, and he's a very illustrious alumni of HUL. He had his retirement speech. And he spoke to us about 4 or 5 qualities that he found unique in HUL, which accounts for HUL's success over so many decades. Right? Companies come and companies go, but lever seems to remain. And he spoke about that. At that time, I said, oh, this is a really interesting thought. One should expand on this and bring it out to a whole younger generation of readers. I mean, the book is meant for 20 to 30-year-olds. But I forgot about it. And then, this publisher of mine, Chiki Sarkar, who owns Juggernaut, met me socially for a cup of tea. And she was saying, in her house, the question that is often asked on the dining table is, why does HUL produce so many CEOs? And she said, why don't you write a book? I said, forget about it. I have a day job. I'll write it when I retire. I've got. But then, coincidentally, a few days later, I happened to get a hold of HUL's annual report from 1957 or 56. And I did some doodles. And I found that over a 60-year period, this company had grown its profits on a trot annually at 15%. So I said, then I asked one of my young brand managers, find me a company in the world which has this kind of 60-year record. And he couldn't, he looked at General Electric, Sony, but even those falter somewhere down the line. So I said, look, then I called back Chiki and said, look, this is a unique company which has managed to be at the top of the game for 6-7 decades. And it certainly needs some kind of analysis on what constitutes long-term success. And that's really why I wrote the book.
And from that moment on, you there would be a lot of research. Then you'll know a lot of anecdotes, but you'll try to get to the facts and a lot of other numbers. So, what were the interesting discoveries you got? You had an intuition that I'll write a book, but once you actually start writing a book, did you discover any interesting things that you?
You see, the thing is, you won't believe it, Jatin, that I wrote 70% of the book in 2 weeks. And basically what I did is I mentally said, I need to do about 50,000 words, 10 chapters, 5,000 words each. It's very much in an IMA, I had structured it. And then I said, every day I got to finish 5,000 words. It doesn't matter what junk I write. And I started writing with a stream of consciousness with broad structures in place. Then, so in 10 days time, I had finished 50,000 words. Then when I came back to it, I did some editing and I found that a lot of these things were my opinion, my experiences. And wherever I was making a point with my experience, I said, now let me do 3-4 months of research to find somebody else's experience that buttresses my experience. Yep. So rather than looking for a needle in a haystack and speaking to hundreds of people and arriving at a thesis, I kind of wrote the book and then started filling in the blanks. Something actually I learned in IIM Ahmedabad, Professor Jain used to say that when you're doing marketing, he said, speak to one consumer and you base your answer on one consumer and you write down the answer that you think based on that one consumer. Then meet 50 consumers, 100 consumers and start modifying that answer. And then you'll get the right answer. So I kind of use that technique that I learned in IMA. And I won't say it's a magnum opus, but certainly it's, it's yielded good results.
And what is that one consumer when you actually wrote this book? Of course, it is relevant for many more people. But when you wrote the book, which persona was in your mind? And this book,
I was looking at myself in the age group of 20 to 25. I was large amounts of the experiences came from my early career, and I was also talking to people who either are leaving the business school, are making decisions, or in the early part of their career. I also want to, and it's similarly to staying in the wicket, mold, people who are in this 20 to 30-year age group. And a 25-year-old would have been my bullseye, who's done his first job and is wondering whether to quit and to move on. And what do I do next? And I guess the book is really written for that person.
You mentioned that there was a publisher. You already knew them. So that part was a little easier. So how much time it took? What was that process of, you having that idea, doing initial research to actually publishing the book?
No, I mean, as I told you, you see the the offer came first. I had the conversation on June 15th. With Chiki Sarkar, I took 2 weeks leave between July 1st and July 15th. And by July 15th, I had a first draft ready. And I had put paragraphs saying, I will ask and find some more work here. And then by around about October, I had finished the work. Took another 3 months, finished it. And, then the editors did a great job of editing it. I come from a family of writers. My brother himself is an author who's written a book recently, which is done well, called Jugalbandi. And he had written a book on Narasimha Rao. So he's an author and he's a best-selling author. So when you have a younger brother who's a best-selling author, then a lot of things also get sorted out.
And what is the most interesting response or feedback you got once you published the book?
I got many responses that touched me, and I continue to get it on LinkedIn every day. I think it's touched a chord with a lot of youngsters. But the letter that made the most impact to me was a letter written by somebody who had retired from the company in 86 or 87. He must have been a gentleman in his 80s. And he wrote me a long letter saying that, one thing that has not changed in HUL is the value systems that we all grew up with. And I'm very happy to see that you are talking in today's generation of the same value systems that we saw in the 50s and 60s. He was really relating to his time in the 50s and 60s. So I think that letter was the most touching one that I received from a lot of people.
And you mentioned that you took a leave for 2 weeks and you wrote a book. You're not a career author, right? Of course, you write a lot of stuff. But what was that process? Anything you had to change the way you approach things to be able to write continuously for 2 weeks?
No, I think that it's quite simple. I think in IIM Ahmedabad, we are taught this course called Written Analysis and Communication, WAC, where, we're taught to write in a structured manner. I think it's the most important course that I learned in IIM. It was WAC, where you immediately structure it. You break a problem, you ask the question. See, the most important thing in any piece of writing is what is the question, what is the problem? And the question here was, why has HUL been successful for 6 decades, on the trot? Yeah. And once you ask that question, you then say, why has it been successful in marketing? What are the people policies? Why has it been successful in costs? And there are 7 or 8 questions that come, and each of them will have 4 or 5 answers. Each of those sub answers will have 2 or 3 examples. So mentally, you've drawn a fishbone, and then it's like a jigsaw puzzle where you're kind of filling in the blanks. And then suddenly in the middle, you might get something. You may have some inspiration, something may go, but broadly, the process is analytic. Sometimes you get, to synthesize something different, some lateral, and you should be open to influences. You shouldn't be rigid also while writing, but I would say 80% you got to be quite structured. At least certainly I'm a structured writer. I'm not a creative writer, Creative writers are often not structured, but business writing is structured.
Yep. And you mentioned one of the big reason is about marketing and understanding the consumer persona. That's why a lot of these people went on to become big ticket CEOs and be successful at that. So what is that marketing approach you applied for this book? In a way, book is a product. And so what was that?
Yeah, see, I think very good question, very insightful question, Jatin. So let me answer this in a few ways. You see, I did go about writing the book very much like how I go about doing product development and marketing in levers. The most important thing is when you develop a new product, you got to solve a consumer problem. So the question you got to ask, as I told you, is what's the consumer problem here, right? You got to be very close to the consumer. Here, I was the consumer myself. I was very close to my own experiences as a youngster. So, I had that advantage of me being the consumer. And then I fanned out and spoke to a lot of people about HUL. So the 3 months that I did, I must have spoken to 50, 60 people who spent in HUL. Then, let me give you 2 really interesting examples of good marketing in writing the book. All through the book, the title of the book was How HUL Works. A few days before publication, I was thinking about it. I had written a chapter on benefits and attributes, that consumers buy benefits, not attributes. And then it struck me that how HUL works is an attribute. It's not a benefit to the consumer, whereas CEO Factory is a benefit to the reader. What are you saying? How do you become a CEO? So I told my publisher, look, I think CEO Factory, she said, not sure, this, that. I said, look, let's go and do a Facebook A/B test. Give me a dummy page on your publishing page and let me put 2 titles, How HUL Works and CEO Factory. And, let me just write it down and get clicks. And, CEO Factory was 30 to 40% better than How HUL Works. So 3-4 days before publication, we changed the title from How HUL Works to CEO Factory. The other thing is, in packaging. Now, there were a lot of, if you look at the packaging on the cover of this book, it is certainly, a lot of people, it's an old surf design. Now, I had a personal angle on the old Surf Excel before it became the current packaging. It used to have a starburst like this. And it's not a business book, right? A lot of business books look serious and so on. But I said that this book is about HUL and it's got to capture in the way it looks something which is very lever-like. And the surf packaging of the 80s, it's not even the surf packaging of the 90s, but something that I felt also became the standard of detergent packaging. So contrary to how book covers are made, which are typically business-like, we took a FMCG product and put it onto a book cover. It's got clutter-breaking ability. It stands out. Some people say it's not serious enough, and I'm not saying everyone likes it. A lot of people don't like it. But one of the rules in marketing is if people have strong likes and dislikes, you should do it. If people don't have a point of view, right, then you're in trouble. So you have a bland cover, people don't have a point of view. This one, some people say, I love this design. It's a cult design. Some people say it looks cheap. It looks like a detergent pack. then I knew I had the right answer. So these are two examples of marketing in play while writing the book.
I was about to actually ask this question. What would have been the alternate title of this book?
Yes. That would have been the alternate title, How HUL Works.
And we'll try to do a rapid fire. Which is your favorite book?
My favorite book is probably Catch 22 by Joseph Heller. Yeah.
And what is the book you would like to read? Probably not written yet, but you are interested in this, and you may want to read this kind of a book.
I think the book that I really enjoy reading is any book on the deciphering of the Indus script. I'm very interested in. I know this is not related to management, but since you asked me a question, this is what I devour in my free time, and I hope in my 60s I can spend some time devoted to really understanding the Indus Valley script. And that's the book that I want to read that hasn't been written yet.
Awesome. And so we do this series called eChai with Pioneers, where I ask this question. I am asking this question to you also. If you were not with HUL, or if you were not in this career, what else would have been your alternate career?
I wanted to be an economist when I joined IMA. And then even after I left IMA and I was in Levers, I got an opportunity to study economics. And believe it or not, when I was quitting to go to Harvard, actually, my sales team got very emotional. I hadn't finished my sales team. So I said, yeah, let me finish one more year. I'll postpone that. But by the time things had moved on. So I think I'd have been an economist.
And you mentioned that your brother has a second book coming up. So is there a race? When is your second book coming up?
No, I think my brother is a professional author. I think there's a saying which says that almost everybody has one book in them and almost nobody has two books in them. So my brother's the exception, but I don't think I'm the exception to that.
There will be a lot of young startup founders or aspiring entrepreneurs who will be watching this video or reading this conversation. So what would be the key takeaway for them from the CEO Factory?
Yeah, I think the key takeaway is entrepreneurs are by definition in a land grab phase. You got a new market, you got to grab the land. But you must always keep institution building at the back of your mind, because if while the race to get to whatever metric you have in the short term, you don't build the company on strong institutional legs, right? Everything, when you study a company 60 years old and you get into corporate history, everything that is famous at a point in time, if it's not based on strong institutional values, will crumble, right? And you got to remember that a lot of people have a sense of invincibility in the moment that, my God, look at my valuation. I'm a unicorn. I'm this, I'm that. But if that is not underpinned by strong institutional values, it won't last.
Thank you so much, Sudhir, and we wish you all the best.